The moment Daniel Carter opened the door of the small cafe, every conversation seemed to stop. He had only come because his sister had promised him that this time would be different, that meeting someone new might finally remind him that life was more than bills, school runs, and the quiet ache of raising a child alone. But when Daniel looked across the cafe and saw the woman sitting by the window, his heart sank. Everyone in town knew her. People called her difficult, cold, strange, and worse. Some parents warned their children not to speak to her. Some shopkeepers avoided serving her. Even Daniel's sister had lowered her voice when mentioning her name. Yet the woman lifted her eyes, looked directly at him, and said something that made the years between them suddenly disappear. She said, "I never forgot you." Before we continue, if you believe that kindness can give people second chances, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Little Kindness Tales. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this to you. Daniel was 38 years old and had spent the last 7 years building his life around his 11-year-old daughter, Lily. His wife had passed away after a long illness, leaving Daniel with grief he rarely talked about and a child who still remembered the sound of her mother's laughter. Daniel worked during the day as a maintenance supervisor at a community center, repaired whatever broke around their modest home in the evenings, prepared Lily's lunches, helped with homework, and made sure she never went to bed believing that she was alone. He was not wealthy, handsome in the way magazines described handsome men, or particularly confident around strangers. He was simply dependable. And after losing his wife, dependability had become the one thing he trusted. His younger sister, Marissa, had watched him slowly turn his entire life into a routine. One afternoon, while they sat outside a bakery during a bright spring day, she told him that he deserved to meet someone again. Daniel immediately refused. He said he had no interest in dating, especially when his daughter needed him. Marissa smiled and reminded him that caring for Lily did not mean he had to close every door forever. She told him about a woman named Evelyn Hart, someone who had recently moved back to town. Daniel had heard the name before. Everyone had. Evelyn was the woman people avoided. Years earlier, Evelyn had owned a small bookstore near the town square. It had been one of the quietest and most welcoming places in town until a family tragedy changed everything. After that, Evelyn became withdrawn. She stopped attending community events, stopped answering casual questions, and rarely spoke unless necessary. Rumors filled the silence. People claimed she was arrogant. Others said she hated everyone. Some even whispered that she had done something terrible, though nobody could ever explain exactly what. Instead of asking what had happened, the town simply decided who she was. Daniel was reluctant, but Marissa insisted that he at least have lunch with her. So, on a clear Tuesday afternoon, he walked into the cafe and found Evelyn waiting near the window. She was around his age, dressed simply in a navy cardigan and cream blouse, with dark brown hair tied neatly behind her shoulders. She looked tired rather than unfriendly. When Daniel sat down, she studied his face for several seconds. Then came the words he never expected. "I never forgot you." Daniel stared at her, confused. He told her they had never met properly. Evelyn gave a small, almost painful smile and reminded him of something that had happened 19 years earlier. Daniel had been a teenager then, working part-time at a grocery store after school. One rainy afternoon, he had seen a frightened young woman standing outside a hospital entrance. She had dropped a folder filled with papers, and everyone walked past her. Daniel had stopped, picked everything up, and carried the folder inside for her. He had only spoken to her for a few minutes before rushing away to catch his bus. Daniel suddenly remembered. The young woman had been Evelyn. What Daniel did not know was that Evelyn had been waiting outside that hospital because her younger brother had been seriously ill. She had been terrified, alone, and convinced that nobody cared. Daniel's small act of kindness had been the first moment that day when someone had treated her like a human being rather than a problem. She had remembered his face ever since. A local committee announced that Evelyn's community reading center proposal would not be approved because several residents had submitted complaints about her character. Daniel was furious. He asked who had made the accusations, but the complaints were anonymous. Evelyn simply accepted the decision and told Daniel she was used to it. Daniel could not accept that. He began asking questions, not to defend Evelyn blindly, but to find the truth. He discovered that one of the complaints came from a former business associate who had once wanted Evelyn's bookstore property. Another came from a woman who had never spoken to Evelyn but had repeated an old rumor. Slowly, Daniel realized that almost everything people believed about Evelyn had been built on stories nobody had bothered to verify. When Daniel confronted Evelyn, she asked him not to fight her battles. She told him that she had spent years trying to convince people she was not the person they imagined, and eventually she became exhausted. She said she would rather live quietly than spend the rest of her life begging people to believe her. Daniel looked at her and told her that sometimes silence protects peace, but sometimes silence allows an unfair story to become the truth. The following Monday, Daniel brought the evidence to the community committee. He did not make a speech attacking anyone. He simply presented the documents, explained what he had discovered, and asked the committee to judge Evelyn by her actions rather than rumors. Then Lily stood up. Evelyn sat quietly, tears gathering in her eyes. The proposal was approved. 3 months later, the old bookstore reopened as the Heart Community Reading Room. Children filled the shelves every afternoon. Parents brought donated books. Retired teachers volunteered to help with reading sessions. The same people who had once avoided Evelyn now greeted her warmly. But the most meaningful change happened inside Evelyn herself. She no longer sat alone behind the counter. One bright afternoon, Daniel arrived with Lily carrying a box of books. Evelyn looked up and smiled. Daniel told her that Lily had something for her. Lily handed Evelyn a handmade card. On the front were 3 words, "Thank you for staying." Evelyn held the card against her chest. Daniel asked why she had remembered him for 19 years when he had barely remembered her. Evelyn smiled and explained that people often believed kindness had to be enormous to matter. But sometimes the smallest kindness arrived at exactly the moment someone needed it most. Daniel had forgotten the rainy afternoon because, to him, helping her had been ordinary. To Evelyn, it had been proof that the world still contained good people. Daniel looked around the reading room and realized something else. He had spent years believing that moving forward meant leaving the past behind. But perhaps moving forward meant carrying the good parts of the past into the future. He never became a different person. He was still a single father who worried about school projects, grocery bills, and whether Lily was getting enough sleep. Evelyn was still quiet, thoughtful, and sometimes uncomfortable in crowded rooms. Their lives were not suddenly perfect. But they had found something more valuable than perfection, trust. Months later, the town held a daytime community picnic beside the reading room. Children played games on the grass while parents shared food beneath the clear afternoon sky. Daniel watched Lily laughing with her friends while Evelyn stood nearby helping younger children choose books. For years, Daniel had believed his life had ended the day he lost his wife. He had continued living because Lily needed him, but he had stopped expecting anything new from life. That afternoon, he understood that grief did not erase love, and moving forward did not mean forgetting someone who had once mattered. It meant allowing life to bring new reasons to smile without feeling guilty for doing so. Evelyn looked toward him from across the lawn. Daniel smiled. She smiled back. There was no grand announcement, no perfect ending, and no promise that life would never hurt again. There was only 2 people who had once been strangers, brought together by a forgotten act of kindness and a second chance neither had expected. And sometimes, that is how the most beautiful chapters begin. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes people deserve second chances, and subscribe to Little Kindness Tales. Your support means more than you know. Special request: before you leave, comment, "Kindness deserves a second chance," if you believe we should never judge someone without knowing their story. Because the truth is, we rarely know what someone is carrying behind a quiet face. The person everyone avoids may simply be someone who has been hurt too many times. The person who seems cold may once have been the warmest person in the room. And the stranger we barely remember may remember one small kindness from us for the rest of their life. So be kind when you can. You may forget the moment tomorrow, but someone else may remember it forever.